Welcome to a new video in my home automation series, and today I want to make a short version of a recent live stream when I was testing this RemoteIO module, I was just mainly wanted to figure out how it works. So I thought I just turn on the live view as I try to connect a simple setup and try to see how it works. About this product, so this is called a RemoteIO module. I think it's called RemoteIO because this is a device which has inputs and outputs. This particular device has 4 analog inputs and 4 digital outputs that you can control over Ethernet and Modbus. So you can just read registers here for the analog inputs and read and write the coils in order to read or write the status of the outputs. And so that's, as you can see here, the Ethernet interface is here. But then on top of these, and what was more important for me is how that it also has a serial output. And what you can see in the setup at the moment is I have this is a humidity and a temperature sensor, which is connected to it over the serial line here. So the RS485, and this other blue one is just giving it power. And what I can do now is I can use the network interface in order to read the serial device over this. So it works as a gateway. A Modbus gateway between Modbus serial and Modbus TCP. So again, it's a great thing. It's I think it's a really good device when it's used in an industrial setting, because let's assume you have a couple of devices that you need to control, maybe some valves, and also you have to read some analog values like pressures, and maybe there is also like a pump that you can control over Modbus, or there is a pump and you want to read the power consumption on that. So you have a power meter which is on Modbus serial, and then you can control all this just over the Ethernet, especially if it's a big site and these things are like really far away, that are out of the reach of a Modbus serial connection. Then you can just run a network cable to that and then control and read this. And this being a gateway, you can connect as many Modbus devices. I mean, probably there is like a reasonable limit, but you can have a couple of Modbus devices, energy meters, temperature meters, some other special controllers that you can all control and read using this RemoteIO gateway. So what I'm going to do in this video is just quickly show this guy, just show you the listing and what it does, and then just do the basic configuration, how you configure the network and the serial line, and I show you some of the queries, how I can control and read this, but how I can also read the remote devices that are connected over serial. So first thing first is just have a quick look at the listing. So this is a product from CDE Byte. No, actually it's called eByte. You're going to see that when this boots, it's called eByte. I don't know why the website is CDE Byte. Yeah, eByte. And that's the actual model number. And by the way, it is available on Alibaba. So this is the unit price, but it goes down if you want to buy loads of them. Obviously, this is just the list price, and then shipping goes on top of that one. I don't think that they sell on AliExpress, so you just have to talk to the seller directly, or maybe you can contact them if they are selling on any other place. But here they just mention Alibaba. Maybe it's on AliExpress, I guess, as well. I didn't check. And yeah, you can see the main spec, but I already mentioned all of it. And these are the various models that you can have. So as you can see, it's a different combination of digital inputs, analog inputs, digital outputs, and analog outputs. But they all come with a network interface and also serial. So this gateway functionality is available on all of the models. And there's a lot of stuff in here. And yeah, of course, Modbus and yeah, what it can do, and it has a display, and of course this display would change depending on the model you have. And yeah, it has a screen and some buttons for configuration. And that's the thing I was really interested in. So it's how it operates as a serial gateway over Ethernet. So that's what I'm going to talk about that. And of course, for the analog inputs, you can choose between 0 to 20 milliamps or 4 to 20 milliamps. Yeah, there is some, filtering that you can apply. And for the digital input, it can also do counting of, rising edge, falling edge level. And for the digital output, you can also configure the outputs to be a pulse output. And it's also, there is some functionality that you can physically link the inputs and the outputs together. So a change in input automatically triggers the output. Some linkage, yeah. And a couple of other things, yeah. And you can see some of the details here, how each of these works. So the digital output has like a 5 amp relay, so you can, drive simple things. Or if you want to drive a bigger thing, you can just add another contactor to that. That's the yeah, that's it. And yeah, a couple of wiring diagrams of the various analog sensors. Good. So let me just go back and change the screen mode back to this one, so I can show you the setup. It's going to be very easy because it's very quick and very intuitive, to be honest. So you have all these buttons here, and by default, you can use the left and the right buttons to change between the screens. So there is one screen which shows all the inputs. There's no screen for the outputs because you have LEDs here to show the state. And you have this network screen which just shows you the like the IP address, the gateway, and the port and the address number. So, and you can't really do anything else here. There's no up and down. So these are the two screens you have. And you have this middle button, which if you long press, this is when you get into settings mode. And you can set a few things here. You can change the IP of the device. And you just use the left and right arrow to move within the settings, and the up down to actually change it. It's a slow interface, but you have to do it once, so it's not a big deal. So you change the IP, you can change the mask, you can change the gateway, and you can change the port. So that's the Modbus port, default 502. That's the address. So this is the slave address of this device. So he's number 1. So this is number 1. And then you have the settings for the serial interface. So baud, data bits, stop bits, and the parity. And you can also change the language. Okay, Chinese and English. I can do English. So this is all. And I like this one because it's you just connect it to power, you set up the basic network information, and you connect the Ethernet, and this device is accessible on the local network using Modbus TCP. And I already mentioned the setup that you have. I have this additional device. So you can see on the network settings, I have 9600 bauds and 8N1. And this is also configured to 9600 bauds, 8N1. And this one is set up for slave ID 50. So now, if I switch back to this view, maybe I can go back to this view. So let me just go into my Modbus program, and I'm going to connect to this device. So I'm using Modbus TCP over the TCP network. So we could see the address was 1220 and the port is 502. That's what we have seen on the settings screen. So if I do that, I can, for example, if I specify that I want to read the input registers and I want to read 4 input registers. So those are the 4 analog inputs. If I unfortunately don't have any device to test with, but obviously if I would connect any analog input, we could see on the screen what the reading is for the input, and we should be able to see the values. So this is how you just read the inputs. You just standard, well, yeah, simple Modbus, what is it again? Reading input registers, and obviously I have 4 inputs. I'm reading from the address 0 to 4 outputs. And if I switch to coils, then I can just read the coils, which are the outputs. So you can see the output 0 is off, and then 1 and 2 is on, and the 4th is off. And we can see exactly the same here. So 1, 2, 2, 1. And I can use Modbus function 5 to read a single register, so a coil. So if I, as I said, this one is slave ID 1. So on ID 1, address 0, so that's going to be the first one. And I set it to 1, it goes into on. And I can turn it off. And I can turn off the second one, and also the third one. Oh, sorry, second. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, first is 0, second is 1. And you can see that this one gets updated as well. So that actually mimics the output here. So, I mean, obviously I'm reading the status of the 4 coils. So, you know, it's really easy to control the inputs and, read the inputs and also control the outputs and also read the status of the outputs. And that's pretty much what you want. And now the question is how you can, so up until now everything was on this device, so how I can read the device which is connected to the serial of this, so how this works in a gateway function. And for that I'm going to change the read and the write function. So this is a humidity and the temperature sensor, and I know that it has input registers and it has 2 of them, one for temperature and one for humidity. And as I said, this has a slave ID 50. So if I do that, we get values. And if I put my hand on it, we can see that these values go up. So the first value is humidity. So that's 52.1 or 56%. And the second one is temperature. So that's 24.9 or 25 degrees centigrade. And that's it. I mean, I just set the slave address of the device which is on the serial line, and it just reads it. It basically knows that because of the slave ID is not 1, it's not him, then it just sends the request through the serial line, and then it I guess just redirects the response from the serial line back to the TC or the Ethernet port. And that's how it works. So it doesn't really have to know about who is connected here, because all it does is just redirects the message if the slave ID is not his, and that's it. So of course I could, if I would have a device like a serial device connected here which has outputs, I could, you know, do a write single coil with the corresponding slave ID, and that would set the outputs on the serial device. And likewise, I could use any of the other Modbus functions because it just gets redirected over the serial line. I mean, I have this very simple sensor here, which, I mean, it's just a sensor, so I can only read values. I can't really set anything here. I think I could use Modbus to change the address, but I don't want to do that. I guess you get the idea. So as long as the slave ID is something else, you can just do anything. And of course, whilst I'm reading that, I can still change the outputs. So if I want to set the first one to on, then I did that. And in the background, we are reading the slave device. Yeah, there's definitely no issues with that. You can see the different LEDs. So the blue is power, the green is NAT, which I think it's the Ethernet communication. The link shows lights up whenever I have whenever I connect to the device, and then TX and RX is obviously the communication over the serial. So now you can see that because I'm just reading the serial all the time, so the NAT, the TX and RX blinks together because all of the TCP traffic goes over to the serial and back. To be honest, there is not much else to talk about. I mean, I noticed that there are some timeouts. I'm not really sure why is that, but I think most of the requests go through, and then from time to time I get some timeouts. Maybe this device doesn't like to be queried so often. I mean, once every second. Who knows? But I don't think it's not the issue of this device. It will be able to handle that traffic definitely. So probably it's this one, or my junky cabling and not having a terminating resistor could be blamed for the occasional errors. But as you can see, out of 177 or roughly 200 successful writes, I only got 5 errors. So that was it. And I still wanted to go back to the documentation. So there is a fairly extensive English documentation for this. By the way, there is also a Windows executable program where you can configure this device. But since it's so much easier to do it on the screen, I wouldn't use this program, especially because my real concern about, well, not concern, but the reason I don't like this program because, well, first of all, the English language option is not really working. So some of the things get changed from Chinese to English, but not all of them. And this can only connect to this device over the serial, not over TCP. I mean, there is a button here which in the translation or in the documentation it says network control before, but if I click on it, it just says that this feature is not implemented yet. So I think this is pretty much useless. And anything this program can do is documented in here. So there are holding registers where you can change network address, serial settings, serial speed. So anything that you can see on the screen or change on the screen, you can change over Modbus as well. But again, screen is easier, so why would you bother? And there are some other functions. For example, you can see on the digital outputs, you read or set the coils here, but there are some additional registers as well. So for example, you can set the power on state of each of the outputs. You can configure each of the outputs to be in regular mode, so you can turn them on and off, or you can have this pulse mode, which then generates a pulse, and you can control the length of that pulse here. So let me just quickly show you this one. I think this is the most visible thing. So let me just change this one so it reads the coils. So now I'm just reading the coils. You can see now it's only the net is blinking, the RX and the TX is no longer because there's no serial communication. So let me just change this registers. So here it says that 578, which is 1400 in decimals. And if I change to 1, so then this output becomes a pulse output. So if I turn on the first output, you can see it turns itself off automatically. So it only gives a short pulse. And you can specify the pulse length here. So the 5 DC, which is 1500 in decimal. So, and let's say 2000, so that would be 2000 milliseconds, so 2 seconds. Okay, response fine. So now if I do, then that's going to hold the output for 2 seconds. 1, 2, and out. Yeah, so that's how it works. It's very simple to configure. Yeah, and I don't have to use the program for that. So let me write this back to just a regular output. And there are similar functionalities available for example, for the analog input. You can see here that you can change on these registers on whether the output is 0 to 20 amps or 4 to 20 milliamps, and whether you want the device to apply some filter on the input. And you have the register number here. So again, you just read the holding registers, and you have like 4 registers for the filter parameters, 4 registers for the sample range. So input 1, 2, 3, 4. And equally here you have, 1400, 1401, 1402, 1403 for the 4 outputs, and 1500, 1501, 1502, and so on. And I'm guessing for the other various inputs and the outputs, There are similar holding registers, but this document only talks about these two, which I have here. So I see no reason to use the configuration program. It's much easier to do it this way. Just a few screen controls, quick screen controls, and a couple of Modbus commands to set the outputs. I mean, you would only do it once and then it just works. And yeah, but it's quite an extensive documentation. It talks about all the different features and settings and everything. And but I think these were the most important ones that I wanted to mention. And it also talks about some other test program, but I was using Modbus Pol for that. And yeah, they have a couple of wiring diagrams as well, but you know, nothing really much. So I think that will be it. I wanted this to be a quick review. It's 20 minutes anyway, so it's not exactly quick, but I guess you get the idea. I think it's a fairly useful device, especially this gateway functionality, and then you get some inputs and outputs on top of that. So it's definitely cheaper to do something like this or use something like this than buy probably like an expansion card for the PLC that you are using. I mean, they usually go for a much higher price than these Chinese Modbus modules. So I hope that was useful for you. And if you are interested, I'm going to leave the link to this site in the video description. Maybe I can also do the Alibaba listing as well. But I think that will be all for today. Oops, thanks for watching and hopefully see you next video.